The world you knew ended on a Tuesday. Not with a bang, not with a single missile, but with silence. The kind of silence that makes your chest tighten because you realize the hum you never noticed before. The refrigerator, the streetlights, the distant traffic is completely gone. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz at 3 a.m. GMT. By noon, oil futures had gone vertical. By evening, Russia flipped the switch on 3 undersea cables and 2 major European grid. By midnight, your government was holding emergency sessions they would never broadcast. And by Wednesday morning, the gas stations had lines around the block. The ATMs were dark. And the people who laughed at preppers were standing in those lines wondering what comes next. This is not a hypothetical. Every single element of this scenario has been wargamed by NATO analysts, studied by energy economists, and quietly feared by every grid engineer who understands how catastrophically interdependent modern civilization actually is. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly 20% of the world total oil supply in a channel that is, at its narrowest point, 21 miles wide. Russia has already demonstrated its willingness to weaponize energy infrastructure, and governments, when pushed past a certain threshold of chaos, do not protect you. They protect themselves. What follows is a field guide for the days, weeks, and months after those 3 dominoes fall simultaneously. And it is built not on hope, but on physics, chemistry, biology, and the cold logic of human behavior under extreme stress. Start with water, because water is the clock ticking loudest against you. The human body begins significant cognitive decline after roughly 24 hours without water, and most urban water systems depend on electrically powered pumps. When the grid dies, those pumps stop within hours, and the residual pressure in your pipes drains within a day or two. What most people do not realize is that their water heater is a tank holding between 40 and 80 gallons of clean, treated water sitting right in their home. The moment you understand that the grid is not coming back anytime soon, you drain that tank into every container you own. You do it before the water pressure drops, before sediment stirs up from the bottom of municipal lines, before your neighbors figure out the same thing and the city water supply becomes a shared emergency. A garden hose threaded onto the drain valve at the bottom of that heater can fill bathtubs, buckets, pots, trash bags, anything that holds liquid. That single action buys you 3 to 6 weeks of drinking water for a small household if you are disciplined about consumption. The next source is atmospheric. An average cubic meter of air holds between 5 and 25 grams of water vapor depending on temperature and humidity. A cold metal surface causes that vapor to condense. At night, metal roofing, car hoods, large pots, and sheet metal all drop below the dew point if ambient humidity is sufficient. You can collect meaningful quantities of water from dew harvesting by spreading clean plastic sheeting or metal surfaces at a slight angle before dusk and collecting the runoff into containers by early morning. It is not fast. It is not glamorous. But in the absence of everything else, condensation physics does not require batteries or fuel or government permission. It just works. Food follows water in urgency, but the timeline is more forgiving. The average human can survive 3 weeks without food, though cognitive and physical capacity degrade significantly before that point. The real crisis is not starvation in week 1. The real crisis is the psychological weight of empty shelves and the violent behavior that emptiness triggers in others. The grocery stores will be stripped within 72 hours. The restaurants will close within 4. What most people have not thought about is the extraordinary caloric density, hiding in plain sight in an urban environment, that goes largely untouched because nobody thinks of it as food. Pigeons, specifically the common feral pigeon found in virtually every city on Earth, are calorie-dense, protein-rich, and have been a staple food source for human populations from ancient Rome through World War II. They require no refrigeration when freshly caught, and a simple wire mesh funnel trap, baited with any grain or bread can capture multiple birds per day, with zero energy expenditure, once set. A single bird yields roughly 250 to 350 calories of lean meat. 4 birds a day sustains a moderately active adult. The urban forager who dismisses this is the urban forager who starves on principle. Beyond protein, the urban environment is full of edible plant life that the pre-collapse world ignored because it was inconvenient. Dandelions every part, root to flower, are nutritionally dense and found in virtually every park, median, and crack in pavement. Wood sorrel, which looks like small clover with heart-shaped leaves, is abundant in urban gardens and provides vitamin C, which becomes critical when stored food runs low. Cattails growing along drainage ditches and retention ponds yield starchy pollen in spring and edible rhizomes year-round. The knowledge of what grows, when it grows, and where to find it in your specific city is something that cannot be improvised in week 2 of a crisis. It has to be learned before heat and light are the next layer. And here is where most survival guides tell you to stockpile candles and firewood, which is exactly the wrong advice for an urban environment. Candles are fire hazards in buildings not designed for open flame. Firewood requires storage, sourcing, and a functional fireplace. What actually works in a dense urban setting is thermal discipline and chemical light. Thermal discipline means understanding that your body generates roughly 80 watts of heat continuously and that a small enclosed space, a single room with the door sealed at the bottom and heavy curtains or blankets over windows, retains that heat remarkably well. 2 or 3 people in a single insulated room can maintain a survivable temperature in most climates without any external heat source for much longer than most people expect. The physics of thermal mass and insulation do not stop working because the grid went down. Chemical light in the form of calcium carbide in water produces acetylene gas, which burns with a bright controllable flame and has been used for a century in mining lamps and bicycle lights. Calcium carbide is still sold in some hardware and agricultural supply stores as a ripening agent and pest deterrent. A small jar of it and a container of water gives you reliable, directional light for weeks. It requires ventilation and careful handling, but it outperforms batteries and candles on both duration and light output by a significant margin. Communication and intelligence gathering become survival skills the moment the internet and cell networks collapse. Shortwave radio receivers, not transmitters, just receivers, can pull in emergency broadcasts, military communications, and civil defense signals from thousands of miles away without any infrastructure. They require only batteries or a hand-crank generator. The information they provide, where aid stations are being established, where violence is concentrated, which roads are being controlled by whom, is the difference between walking into a dangerous situation and rooting around it. A $20 handheld shortwave receiver bought before the crisis begins is among the highest return investments a prepared person can make. Navigation in a post-grid city requires understanding which spaces humans will occupy and which they will avoid. The most dangerous urban environments in a collapse scenario are predictable. Major retail areas, government buildings, transit hubs, and anywhere visibly holding resources. The least contested spaces are below and between maintenance tunnels, utility corridors, rail underpasses, and the networks of service passages that run beneath most major cities and are entirely forgotten by the general public during normal times. City utility maps, available from municipal planning offices or through FOIA requests before a crisis, reveal these networks in detail. Learning them in advance means having movement corridors through a chaotic city that 99% of the population does not know exist. Water filtration in a post-infrastructure environment requires 2 things: mechanical filtration and chemical treatment. Mechanical filtration means passing water through a series of layers: sand, gravel, crushed charcoal from any wood fire to remove particulates, sediment, and some biological contaminants. This is gravity-fed, requires no power, and can be built from a 2-liter plastic bottle, a coffee filter, and materials available from any backyard or park. Chemical treatment follows mechanical filtration. Unscented household bleach, sodium hypochlorite, kills bacterial and most viral contaminants at a rate of 8 drops per gallon for clear water, 16 drops for cloudy water. That is the CDC protocol. A single 32-ounce bottle of bleach treats hundreds of gallons. It costs less than $2. There is no survival investment with a better cost to life-saving ratio in existence. Now comes the part that most survival guides skip because it is uncomfortable and because it does not fit the optimistic framing of most preparedness content. The psychology of societal collapse is brutal, nonlinear, and will kill more people than thirst or starvation in the first month. Studies of historical collapse events, the Siege of Sarajevo, Hurricane Katrina, the Lebanese Civil War, the Argentine economic collapse of 2001, consistently show that the timeline of human behavioral breakdown follows a predictable pattern. In the first 72 hours, most people cooperate and share information. Between day 3 and day 7, hoarding behavior begins and social trust fractures along existing fault lines of class, ethnicity, and prior relationship. By day 14, organized violence for resources is common in densely populated areas. By day 30, whatever power structures have emerged, whether legitimate or criminal, are effectively permanent until an external force displaces them. The implication of this timeline is that the decisions you make in the first 72 hours have outsized consequences. The person who moves quietly, shares nothing visibly, establishes no high-profile position, and exits high-density residential areas before day 3 has dramatically better survival outcomes than the person who waits for instructions or tries to maintain normalcy. The psychological trap of normalcy bias, the deeply human tendency to interpret ambiguous signals as non-threatening because the alternative is too overwhelming to process, kills more people in the early stages of any disaster than the disaster itself. The Titanic sank over 2 hours and 40 minutes. Most passengers stood on deck, watching the water rise, certain that rescue was coming, because the alternative required a leap of psychological acceptance that was simply too large to make quickly. Managing fear under these conditions is not about being fearless. Fear is a neurochemical alarm system, and suppressing it is both impossible and counterproductive. What works is channeling it. The research on high-stress decision-making, coming largely from combat psychology and disaster response studies, shows that people who have pre-made decisions perform dramatically better than people making decisions reactively under stress. The human brain, under extreme fear, has reduced prefrontal cortex activity, meaning the capacity for complex reasoning drops significantly. Pre-made decision trees. If the power is out for more than 12 hours, I do this. If the water stops, I do this. If I hear sustained gunfire, I do this. Bypass the need for complex reasoning in the moment and allow the more primitive, fast-reacting parts of the brain to execute a plan that the rational mind already made under calm conditions. The second psychological tool is the concept of controllable versus uncontrollable. In a collapsing scenario, the list of things outside your control is enormous and terrifying. The list of things within your control is small but real. Your water, your food, your location, your information, your relationships with the specific humans immediately around you. Survival psychology research consistently shows that people who narrow their focus to controllable variables and take action on them, even small incremental action, maintain cognitive function and emotional stability far better than people who attempt to process the full scope of the catastrophe. You cannot fix the Strait of Hormuz, you cannot restore the grid, you cannot make your government competent. You can fill that water heater tank, you can set that condensation trap, you can tune that shortwave radio, you do the thing you can do, and you do it now. The community dimension of survival is where the math becomes stark. Solo survival in an urban collapse scenario is statistically grim. The caloric expenditure of maintaining security, foraging, filtering water, and managing all other survival tasks alone approaches or exceeds the caloric intake possible for a single person in most environments, meaning a solo survivor is in a slow-motion energy deficit that ends one way. Groups of 4 to 8 people, small enough to avoid attracting attention, large enough to allow sleep rotation, task specialization, and mutual defense have survival outcomes, orders of magnitude better than individuals. The social contracts that hold those groups together under stress are built before the crisis, not during it. Strangers do not form functional survival units under extreme stress. People who already trust each other do. Here is what it comes down to, and there is no softening of this. The gap between the person who survives and the person who does not in a scenario like this is not luck. It is not strength, it is not government support. It is the $300 worth of supplies, the 30 hours of learning, and the single afternoon of honest conversation with the 4 people you would actually want beside you when civilization pauses. Every hour that passes where you have not done those things is an hour of preparation transferred to someone else who did. The Strait closes when it closes. The grid drops when it drops. The government fails when it fails. None of those moments ask for your permission or your readiness. The only question that has ever mattered in every collapse that has ever happened is the same question that will matter in this one. Were you ready before it started, or did you start getting ready after it was already too late?